We're joined again at our table this morning by Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrat of California, the top-ranking Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, and we're talking about security and privacy under this USA Freedom Act that was passed into law in the Senate, signed by the President. So let me show you and our viewers two headlines. Christian Science Monitor says USA Freedom Act, one small step for privacy. Then you have the National Journal, Senate passes major NSA reform bill. Which is it?
It's a major reform bill, and it does some very significant things. It ends bulk collections, so it gets the government out of the business of gathering millions of call records, domestic call records of people that have nothing to do with terrorism. It also establishes, I think this is very important, an independent advocate in the FISA Court, in that secret court, so that there's someone there who can test the government's arguments, that can challenge some of the case law that the government might cite. And basically the American people have an advocate for their privacy and civil liberties in that court. So that's a very important reform. It also requires the declassification of significant FISA Court opinions. So opinions, for example, like the one that established the bulk metadata collection program, those would be published so the American people could see what this court is doing. And obviously they would have to be redacted in a way that protects important sources and methods. And then also there's a provision that will allow companies that are served with process, that are required to provide information to the government, to be more transparent with their customers about it, so their customers can have the confidence of knowing that this is not something routine and just how often it takes place.
Well, this is the headline in the Financial Times. And it remains largely untouched after curbs. Opponents of USA Freedom Act say the Section 215 is just the tip of the iceberg. This is what the Financial Times reports. The bulk of the data scooped up by the NSA comes from overseas and is based on separate legal authorities not touched by the USA Freedom Act, most notably Section 702 of the FISA Amendments Act and the Reagan-era Executive Order 12333.
Well, that's all true. And the reality is that we really need the NSA, as well as our other elements of the intelligence community, to be able to gain information about people who mean our country harm. So this was I think, the main program that people were concerned about that impacted on the privacy interests of the American people. And so I think that has been very substantially addressed. But in terms of our ability to overseas to gather intelligence on Al-Qaeda or ISIS or other foreign powers that are inimical to our own interests, yes, we need a robust intelligence capability, and we want the NSA to be able to do its work. We just saw, again, the challenges that we have in Boston with this recent potential attack. We saw it in Garland, Texas. We've seen attacks in Paris, in Canada, in Australia. So this is a real problem. And given that we don't want to have troops everywhere in the world, we're more and more reliant on our intelligence capabilities to keep the country safe.
Financial Times also writes this, that while the law, USA Freedom Act, bans bulk collection, the government will still find ways to secure what they term bulky requests that involve large quantities of data by using national security letters issued by the FBI, which can compel the handover of records without the approval of a judge.
I don't think that's accurate if they're talking about the Metadata Program, because the legislation bans bulk collection under any authority. So it precludes it under national security letters as well as under this existing FISA program. It's true that the national security letters and other tools of the intelligence community don't go away, but they can't be used for bulk collection like we have in the Metadata Program.
This has been a routine exercise by Congress, if you will, to renew the Patriot Act since the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks. Not so much this time around. There's a lot of debate taking place. How much credit does Edward Snowden get for that?
Well, Snowden certainly sparked an important debate in terms of where we're drawing the line between privacy and security, and I think a lot of our capabilities post 9/11 outpaced the review that we were giving them and the public debate on it. But there were other ways for Snowden to raise these issues without, frankly, leaking vast amounts of data, a lot of which has, frankly, very little to do with the privacy interests of the American people. And a lot of the data that he accessed, frankly, has military import and applications, again, have nothing to do with privacy. And there's, I think, a profound question about why would he do that if his goal is as he has stated it. So I think there was an appropriate way to raise those kind of whistleblower objections. But what he did went well beyond that and has been very damaging.
We're talking about the Patriot Act, the extension of it under the USA Freedom Act that passed in the House and the Senate, signed into law by the President on Tuesday night. As many of you know, those provisions expired Sunday because of a filibuster in the Senate by Senator Rand Paul. So we want you to weigh in. The phone lines are open. The phone lines are on your screen, so start dialing in for Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrat of California. Yesterday we had on the show Congressman Thomas Massie, Republican of Kentucky, who supported Senator Rand Paul's efforts in the Senate. And he had this to say about the USA Freedom Act and the lack of reform for these FISA courts. I want to get your reaction to it.
One good thing about the Freedom Act is the data collection and storage stays at the phone companies now instead of going to the government. And that makes me feel better, but the gatekeeper to that data, it's the FISA Court. And I would like to see more reform there. In our original version of the Freedom Act, we had a civil liberties advocate. You have to have an adversarial, you have to have two lawyers in a courtroom to come up to present the truth, and then the judges can decide. But there's not an adversarial relationship. There's nobody representing civil liberties in the FISA Court. We put in a civil liberties advocate in our first Freedom Act. They watered it down. It's now called an amicus curiae, a friend of the court that serves at the pleasure of the court as a technical advisor. And I would like to see that oversight strengthened.
Congressman, what do you make of his criticism there?
Well, you know, I agree with it in substantial part in the sense that I, too, would have liked to have seen an even stronger advocate in the FISA court. But I think that we did pretty well with this. This was a compromise work product that was able to unite both left, right, and center. It had really phenomenal support. And when you consider that this is one of the most difficult issues at the intersection of privacy and security, and the Congress really did what it's supposed to do. It grappled with that issue. It got a lot of feedback from the public. It came up with a sensible work product. So yes, while there are areas I would have liked to have seen the bill go farther, I think it was a pretty remarkable accomplishment for an otherwise pretty dysfunctional Congress.
Okay. Well, let's hear from viewers. Dave in Mayo, Michigan, a Republican. Hi, Dave.
Hello. Good morning to you. Mr. Schiff, I just would like to say that I agree with what your efforts were there in the Congress. And also, it took a Republican named Rand Paul to finalize this deal. You must admit that also. But it just seems to me that Mr. Obama was violating the Constitution of the United States of America. And an impeachable offense.
By what? By doing what, Dave?
By ignoring the Supreme Court when they said that what they were doing with NSA was unconstitutional. He continued to do it anyway.
Congressman?
Well, I would say a couple of things. First, you know, Rand Paul, though I'm not sure this was his design, did play a role in the passage of USA Freedom by holding up what the majority leader in the Senate wanted, what Mitch McConnell wanted, which was a clean reauthorization. But I'm not sure that he was exactly a proponent of USA Freedom. So I would only give Mr. Paul part credit on this. With respect to the president, the Supreme Court hasn't decided that this metadata program was unconstitutional. There have been some lower courts that have addressed the issue, and more recently, a Court of Appeals opinion that said not that the program was unconstitutional, but that it wasn't authorized by the statute. In other words, the Section 215 of the Patriot Act authorizes the gathering of business records related to an investigation, and that Court of Appeals decided that it was interpreted in such a broad way by gathering all of these bulk metadata records that that was not consistent with what the statute was intended to do. So that's quite a different conclusion than saying it's unconstitutional, and I don't think you can at this point argue that the president was willfully ignoring the Supreme Court law on this. And that Court of Appeals opinion, too, is something that the government could challenge. It's not necessarily a fait accompli. So I think the legal picture is blurry in terms of the legality of this program, but I certainly don't think there's anything you could claim impeachable whatsoever in terms of the president.
We'll go next to Jonesboro, Georgia. Eric, a Democrat there. Hi, Eric.
Hi. I got a comment and a question. My comment is, in my opinion, this whole, election issue is simply another distraction by the corporate media. The corporate media is owned by very rich people, and the idea that those rich people are liberal or Democrats, like Fox News would tell you, is crazy. It's a corporation that's owned by very rich people, which more than likely they're Republican, and anybody that they hire has to do what the boss wants them to do. That means that all media.
But Eric, make the connection though between corporate media and this debate.
I'm going there. Okay, so in my opinion, this issue has been going on for a long time. Bulk data has been kept by telecommunication companies for decades. This law was passed by Bush a decade ago. Now we're talking about it because we're trying to hurt the image of Obama, acting like he's snooping on, Americans' conversations and listening to their conversations. This is metadata, time, date of the phone call, time length of the phone call, things of that nature. This is not content of, what you're talking about, things like that. This is hurting the image of Obama. This is corporate media propaganda, smear tactic. Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, all the C-SPAN uses, all of those are right-wing, all media right-wing. And I would like to ask...
Okay, all right, Eric, I think we got your point. But, Congressman, let's just talk about what information is collected. When you say metadata, what does that mean?
Well, and this is very important because I think there's a lot of confusion in the public about just what that means. A lot of Americans think that the government has been gathering the content of their calls, that is, recordings of their conversations on the phone, and this is just not the case. It's also not the case that these numbers that are part of the metadata are connected to the names of the subscribers. So some people talk about metadata like your telephone bill. But your telephone bill has your name and address on it connected with the people you've been calling. The metadata are just numbers, phone numbers that are phone numbers that they're calling, the time of the call, the date of the call, the duration of the call. But nonetheless, there's been a privacy concern, I think a legitimate one, that even though this data is not content, it's not the conversations, and even though it's not connected to the subscribers, still it's a lot of domestic data about people that are mostly, vast majority, unconnected with crime or terrorism. So why should the government be gathering this? The caller is right. The phone companies have been gathering this because they need to prepare their bills. In fact, the phone companies are required to store it for at least 18 months. In terms of the media bias on this, I'll just say that the program did start under the last president, under President Bush. It actually started without any congressional authorization. And so in that respect, you could say that the Bush practice was less legally supportable than the Obama practice. The media, I think the more conservative media, like the Wall Street Journal, Fox, they have been, I think probably expressing more the viewpoint that the program should be renewed without any reform. Although some of the libertarian right has, like Rand Paul and Mr. Massey, have supported a complete sunset of these authorities. So it's a little more murky picture in terms of the media.
Talk about, though, why the intelligence tactic, I guess, of gathering a bunch of data in order to see patterns. I mean, one viewer said yesterday, if you're looking for a needle in a haystack, why would you make the haystack as large as possible?
Well, see, people have this impression that the reason we gather the bulk data is so that we can mine it, so that we can sort of look at the connections in an abstract way. We just take the data and run an algorithm and it will point to a terrorist. That's not how it works. The way the program would work is, let's say that we arrest an al-Qaeda suspect or we get from where bin Laden was killed, and it has an American phone number in that cell phone or in that pocket letter, as they call it. We would want to know, is this number connected with people in the United States, or in the event of a bombing in the United States, like in Boston, and we get the suspect's cell phone number, we might want to know who have they been in contact with, are there other co-conspirators? And then, now with legal process, you could go to the phone company and say, who is this number connected to? So that's predominantly how that is used. It's not as if we're just looking at the data in abstract, looking for patterns and trying to socially mine information from it.
Okay. Rosa in Bismarck, North Dakota, Republican. Hi, Rosa.
Hi, good morning. My opinion is there is a reason why we have government. There is a reason why people got to think about voting for the new president. They got to focus what kind of problems we have. And first of all, we have to respect the law. I don't care who it is, and I'm not going to mention any names, but we have to stop in the top, start right there. Then we, as the government, we the people are the government people, start thinking about it. We are the ones that said, I'm going to vote for these people because of his or her beliefs.
Okay. All right. That's Rosa. I'm going to go on to Mike, and then I'll have you respond to what you hear there. Merritt Island, Florida, independent. Hi, Mike.
Hi. Good morning.
Morning.
My question is in regards to the Patriot Act and this metadata afterwards. Mr. McConnell was seemed to me to be using fear tactics on the floor with saying Edward Snowden. Well, this was a big issue when it first broke in the media with the people, and a lot of people were complaining about the issue that Rand Paul stood for. And I believe it is both unconstitutional. But my question to the gentleman is, does he believe Congress is dealing in the hard reality of this tough issue because of the nature of the Middle East? And that's my question. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I think we certainly are looking at the reality of the situation and the dangers that we face. But I think there are at least three questions we need to ask about any intelligence program. First, is it constitutional? Is it lawful for us to do this? Second, is this effective? Why gather all this data if it actually doesn't help us in terms of resolving terrorism cases or protecting the country? And then finally, is the program structured in a way that minimizes any unnecessary intrusion on our privacy? That is there a better way to do this where we can get the same national security impact without any risk to our privacy? And I think on that latter point, whatever your views are on the first two issues, on the latter point, clearly the metadata program couldn't survive an answer to that question because there was a better way to structure it. And that better way was to let the companies hold on to their own data, get the government out of the business of gathering this data. Now, it does make it a bit less efficient, and with this, I would agree with, I guess critics by saying that if the government gathers all this data, yes, it's more efficient. We can harmonize that data. We can plummet more readily in the event of an emergency. But frankly, through the aid of technology, we can do that pretty quickly, even though the providers are holding on to their own data. So I think we get the same national security impact, protect privacy by leaving it in the hands of the private providers.
Genie is next. In Benton Harbor, Michigan, a Democrat. Good morning to you.
Hello. I'm listening to all of this business about privacy. When you're driving in your hometown, there's cameras at the stoplights. You go in a store, to purchase something. Everybody has a camera because there's so many people that wants to destroy what we have, that our government must be vigilant.
Well, you're absolutely right. We have to be vigilant. But I think also part of what we treasure about our country is the right to be left alone, the right to our own privacy. So this is a balance, and it's frankly a balance and a challenge that goes back to the founding of the Republic. We have a Fourth Amendment because we wanted to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. That makes us inherently inefficient in a way because we could do a more thorough job protecting the country, I suppose, if we did away with those freedoms and did away with that privacy. But none of us really want to go there. We don't want to let terrorism or terrorists change the way we live our lives. But you make a very good point about the prevalence now, the omnipresence of these cameras everywhere. And it just, to me, highlights how these issues are not going away, and they're going to come up in all kinds of new contexts. And I'll just mention one. Here in D.C., there are innumerable speed cams all over the place. And if you go past one too fast, you get this nice photograph in the mail. At least this is what I'm told. I'm not. You get this nice photograph in the mail of you behind the wheel of your car with your license plate and the time and date of where you were and the location, obviously. And that's in a database. That's a database It may be held by a private vendor. It may be held by a local police department. But basically a database of where people are in their everyday lives, in their car, and all of their graphic splendor. And that, frankly, is far more intrusive from a privacy point of view than anything in the metadata program. And that has little or no safeguard to it. So that's just one privacy issue that we really haven't even discussed. But there are so many more, and I'll just mention one other because I think it's really the granddaddy of the challenges on the forefront of privacy and security, and that is the whole issue of encryption. And what I mean by that is social media platforms and telecommunications companies are creating ways you can communicate with each other that are end-to-end encrypted, so that even with a subpoena, even with a grand jury subpoena, even with a court order, if you go to one of these providers and you say, we have probable cause to believe that these parties to this communication are engaged in planning a terrorist plot or have committed a kidnapping and we want to find the victim, that provider may say, I'm happy to give you what I have, but it's encrypted and I can't even decrypt it myself. So we are going dark in terms of law enforcement and the intelligence community. That's a real issue, and I wish I could say there's an easy solution to that, but there just isn't. Okay, we're going to go to Todd in Indianapolis, a Republican.
Thank you for taking my call.
You bet, Todd.
Hello?
Go ahead with your question or comment.
I'd just like to make a comment. In my opinion, I don't think it's all that important to monitor, the private citizens' emails and things of that nature. I think we would be better suited to start monitoring some of these individuals in Washington.
Okay, with Todd with that opinion. But let me squeeze in Joseph, Congressman, because I know our time with you is short. He's in Mobile, Alabama. On the air.
Thank you. Mr. Schiff, I am a lifelong Democrat, 70 years to be exact. I have followed the Democratic Party since I was a very young man. And the Democratic Party has violated the Constitution of the United States by holding midnight votes. The USA Freedom Act is just the end of what they're doing. Benjamin Franklin stated that we have, under the Constitution, we have freedom from government.
And Joseph, I have to leave it there because the congressman needs to get going. It's a busy day up on Capitol Hill, so just your final thoughts.
Well, we were having amendments on the House floor last night till about 1 in the morning, so believe me, nobody hates late-night sessions more than I do. Look, I think these are enormously important issues, and they're at the heart of that Fourth Amendment debate we've been having for a couple hundred years, and they're not going away anytime soon. And I do think, though, that we are, I hope, reaching an equilibrium where we recognize the national security imperatives. We're reminded of them every week. But at the same time, we want to cherish and hold on to these freedoms that are at the foundation of our republic. And we have to find a way to balance both. And there's never going to be a bright line on these issues. But we need a functional Congress that can do the best job possible. And I think with USA Freedom, we, in a rare showing of the ability to work together, got the job done.
Quick conversation with you, Congressman. Appreciate it, but nonetheless, hope you come back again.
Thank you very much.
Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrat of California, and the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. When we come